Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We're back with our panel. Ruth Marcus is a columnist for The Washington Post. Michael Shearer is the Washington bureau chief for Time magazine and wrote the cover story on Donald Trump for this week's magazine. Ann Guerin covers the Hillary Clinton campaign for The Post, and Manu Raju covers the campaign for Politico. Manu, I want to start with you. You've covered immigration wars on the Hill. When Donald Trump talked about the good people who are here illegally coming back in, won't that be seen as amnesty in some?
I think that will give an opening to some of the folks who are pushing, who are trying to regain get noticed in this debate. What was interesting, too, was how Ted Cruz is trying to show himself as the immigration hardliner in this, as Donald Trump has really dominated the debate on immigration. You heard Ted Cruz talk about his legislation that he introduced, things that actually sound a lot like the Donald Trump plan, but Donald Trump has been dominating the narrative on immigration, and it shows just how much Ted Cruz has been hurt by Donald Trump in this debate, in this race. I mean, a lot of those Tea Party supporters, those folks who are evangelicals, who should support Ted Cruz, are flocking to Donald Trump. So you're seeing all these candidates recalibrate their positions based on what Donald Trump has been saying on the campaign trail, and immigration is one of those issues.
It does seem like Trump's trying to catch those supporters on the rebound, potentially. In that recalibration, Michael, that Manu talks about, who is taking advantage of the Trump immigration moment? Was there another candidate who grabbed it and said, here, I can seize the limelight?
Rick Santorum did, but it's hard to say he's really taking advantage of much. He's at 1% of the polls. I mean, we're at a stage right now in this race where almost the pose, the posture matters more than the substance of what you're putting out. And clearly on immigration, Trump is winning it. He's coming across as the toughest. He's saying things like, we're going to move them all out, a totally unrealistic plan. I mean, if you go back to 2012, Trump was actually quoted saying that Mitt Romney's plan to self-deport America's undocumented immigrants was crazy. Now he's saying we're going to do it and I'll handle it because I can manage things. It's all pose, and it's winning for him because he's selling something to the Republican Party right now, which isn't as much about policy or ideology. It's about, I am the guy who will actually get stuff done. I'm not corrupted like the rest of the political elite, and I'm a fighter.
And Jeb Bush tried to get in the conversation this week a little bit. He's the one, he got a little testy when he was asked about this notion of anchor babies and him using that term for people born to the parents of undocumented immigrants. Where's Jeb Bush in this conversation now?
Well, Jeb Bush appeared to me to be trying very hard to attack Donald Trump in a way that he hasn't done really until now, because he didn't think he had to. He didn't think that Trump was going to last past the summer and be the kind of force that he is now, dragging, certainly the immigration is maybe the most salient example right now, but dragging the whole field either to the right or sort of along with him. And Jeb Bush appeared to think that that was demagoguery and he didn't want to have to engage in it. But you saw him do it this week, which suggests that he's a good bit more worried, as his poll numbers would suggest that he should be, about the Trump factor.
What's your sense of how? Go ahead, jump in.
Well, he did it this week, but he did it without rejecting the use of the term anchor babies. And let me just say that a week in which the Republican Party is talking about anchor babies and what to do about them and talking about repealing birthright citizenship is not long-term a good week for the Republican Party. And one other really quick point. I think that there's a really, it's dangerous for the Republican Party, but there's a very interesting opening for Trump's would-be competitors on the right with this argument about the good people, because now it seems like we're going to have this, it's a nice door, but it's a kind of Trump revolving door where you spend an enormous amount of money to get the good people, to get everybody out and break up families. Then you get the good people back in, which is internally inconsistent with his argument that we need everybody out because they're taking wages and jobs away from the good people already here who are American citizens. So it makes no
totally
sense.
Unworkable, right?
Opening on the right, long-term problem for the Republican
Party. I would also add, Jeb is really trying to become the Trump alternative in this race. He's clearly, that's why he's taking that tougher line to Trump. And they realize, the Jeb people realize that Trump is probably here to stay. So they need to show some variance between him and Trump and show that he can actually be an electable alternative.
Michael, you were in his office. He brought a bald eagle along. He seems to be, he's here to stay, as Manu says, but he's also having fun. I mean, he's here to stay because he's having fun.
He is. And you remember Jeb Bush came into this this race saying, I would be the joyful candidate. There's no joy in Jeb Bush right now. And what Trump has shown is that the other candidates have yet to find their voice. Jeb is struggling to be tough, to stand up to Trump without being angry. Scott Walker, you saw over the last week, really struggling to come up with any answer on immigration that had details in it, that made sense. He's running as the bold, courageous conservative who took on the unions, but he can't answer basic questions on the trail, so it's hurting his message. I think you can say a lot of things about Trump, and many of them are true, but you can't say that he doesn't know who he is and what his act is. And so when he goes on TV, when he gives, an off-the-cuff hour-long speech before 20,000 people, he knows exactly who he is, and voters pick up on that.
And he's not going any place while his ratings are as good as they are. He's all about the ratings, and they're terrific. So like a lot of people, and I'm here to say I was wrong, I thought Donald Trump was going to self-destruct. He is not going to self-destruct. Somebody like Jeb Bush or somebody is going to have to help destroy him. But the interesting piece that shows that he is in fact destroyable was in, I think it was a CNN poll. 58% thought someone of voters, and I think it was Republican voters, thought Donald Trump the Republican Party did not have as good a chance with Donald Trump to take back the White House. Only 30% thought he represented the best chance to take back the White House. So the question is, this infatuation is going to last past the summer, but when voters really have to get serious and start thinking about a third Democratic term, is Donald Trump really going to be where they settle?
And if when other Republican candidates drop out of the race, like later in the primary season, that's when some will be questioned: will those voters flock to Trump, or will they flock to Walker or Jeb or whoever else is in the race?
We haven't seen attack ads against Republicans. We haven't, Republican attack ads against Donald Trump. We haven't seen, them really start to say, we got to get rid of this guy because it's, messing up the race. But that could happen.
With super PACs, that winnowing process could take a lot longer than we're used to.
And with the election calendar. I would just say that if you look at the last month and a half, Trump, we're in an age of free media right now. No one's spending a lot of money on TV, and Trump dominates. I mean, he's just on TV all day, every day. You can't miss him. And the other candidates have been pushed aside, and that will change. I mean, Jeb has $100 million to start to spend on TV, in these early states. A lot of the other candidates, Cruz has $50 million. I mean, this is significant money. Even Perry has millions of dollars in the bank.
Well, and that shows just how long of a race this is going to be. I mean, it's not just going to be Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, go past Super Tuesday.
When people can write you $5 million checks or $10 million checks, Trump at 25% could be beaten by someone else who was at a greater percent, but when you've got this fractured field and the capacity to stay there for a long time, that's where the party could really have a problem. And for the first time, I can imagine Trump winning the nomination.
Winning the nomination. And I want to switch to the other party and talk about Hillary Clinton, who you cover. Not another good week for her on the email and server question. Walk us through why that was the case.
Well, they have been trying to put this to rest as much as is possible. The campaign does know that this is an issue that's going to stick with her for months, well into the 2016 calendar. The way the emails are being released by the State Department and the way the Republicans are using it guarantees that. What they've been trying to do is not get in the way. They would, and this was another week in which what she said herself seemed to get in the way. She had a short press conference, which didn't really win her a lot of great reviews the other day, where she got quite angry, visibly irritated at questions about the email issue. And then the campaign spent the rest of the week trying to put out their version of events, which continued all the way into Saturday. The campaign had a press conference for beat reporters on Friday afternoon by telephone. Anything you want to, know and ask before the weekend, we're here to clear it up. Helpful, maybe, but they clearly didn't think they'd get the job done, because all day yesterday there was just a tweet barrage of giving their version.
Ruth, when I was calling around about the Biden question and whether he's going to get into the race yesterday, somebody who's talked to him sort of felt like the mishandling for another week from Hillary Clinton created a new opportunity for Joe Biden. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely. That's why we are reading all of this Biden chatter and hearing all the Biden chatter. he's clearly trying to let this play out as long as possible to watch what happens to Hillary Clinton. Look, Joe Biden has wanted to be president and has been running for president since Hillary Clinton was First Lady of Arkansas. Does he want to run? Yes. He's looking at not whether he thinks he can win the general election, but whether he thinks at this point he can win the nomination. I think in the end that he will conclude that he can't at this point,
that he cannot,
and won't run. And I am not imagining that Senator Warren is going to go endorse Joe Biden right now, who voted for the bankruptcy bill that was her bête noire back when she was a Harvard law professor.
Michael, do you think he runs?
I think we know right now he is doing everything he would be doing if he intended to run. So he can always
totally agree.
He can pull the plug. And we also know about Joe Biden that he has never stopped swimming forward. It's like I say about a shark, right? He always goes forward, and it would be a huge decision for him. I mean, it's a decision not just about not running, but basically stepping out with many years left in his life from the game that has been his life. And I think it would be a very difficult decision. And I think the cost for him of getting in the race, seeing how it goes, maybe he takes off, maybe he doesn't take off, is not that great considering the alternative. So I'm not as confident as you that he'll stay.
I think the question is going to be what is Joe Biden's lane in the Democratic primary? I mean, you have Bernie Sanders getting a lot of support from the left, and Hillary Clinton has her own lane trying to have a more diverse coalition. Can Biden pull enough support from the Hillary faction as well as the Bernie faction?
I've got to wrap here. We'll be back in a minute. Ken Burns may be the most renowned documentary filmmaker of his time. His 1990 PBS documentary, The Civil War, was seen by almost 39 million viewers. 25 years later, the film has been converted to ultra-high definition and will air on PBS for 5 nights starting September 7th. We sat down earlier with Ken Burns and talked about the new version of the film and how the Civil War is still affecting America's conversation on race.
I went in as we were beginning the process and literally burst into tears because archives that I've known and sort of in my bloodstream all of a sudden I had new details. I hadn't noticed that musket. I hadn't noticed the way the hand was resting on a pistol. The grain had interrupted that, and it also reminded me of the centrality of this event. I mean, it's okay to tie pretty bows. It's okay to go into makeup and get yourself camera ready, is what we've done for a new age with this. It's another thing to understand and come to terms with the centrality of this event. And it's occupying all the films that I'm working on now, and yet it stays there. You know, when the Constitutional Convention happened, there was a man named John J. Chapman who said, slavery was like a sleeping serpent. It lay coiled under the table during the deliberations. Thereafter, slavery was on everyone's mind, if not always on his tongue. And so we punted in 1789 and 1776, and 5 years later we went to war, the most important event in our history.
Are you surprised that polls show that more people think that the Civil War was about states' rights, about encroachment of the federal government, than think it was about slavery?
You know, we've grown up as a country with a lot of powerful symbols of the Civil War in popular culture, and that would be Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's classic, and Gone with the Wind, of course. And in that, it postulates, among other things, both films, that the Ku Klux Klan, which is a homegrown terrorist organization, was actually a heroic force in the story of the Civil War. So it's no wonder that Americans have permitted themselves to be sold a bill of goods about what happened. Oh, it's about states' rights. It's about nullification. It's about differences between cultural and political and economic forces that shape the North and the South. If you read South Carolina's Articles of Secession, the first state to secede, the birthplace of secession, the home of the original fire eaters, as they were called, in reaction to Abraham Lincoln, a moderate's election, they do not mention states' rights. They mention slavery, slavery, slavery. And that we have to remember. It is much more complicated than that, but essentially the reason why we murdered each other more than 2% of our population. 750,000 Americans died. That's more than all the wars from the revolution through Afghanistan combined, was over, essentially, the issue of slavery.
And you mentioned that these themes that you worked on 25 years ago in this film have been running through your work ever since then.
Yeah, the main American theme, I think, is freedom. It's about individual freedom in opposition or in tension with collective freedom. It's about states' rights versus a strong federal government. All of these tensions have been in place since the very beginning, even before the beginning. But we also notice that race is always there. Always there. When Thomas Jefferson says all men are created equal, he owns a couple hundred human beings. And he doesn't see the contradiction or the hypocrisy and doesn't free anybody in his lifetime and sets in motion an American narrative that is bedeviled by a question of race. And we struggle with it. We try to ignore it. We pretend with the election of Barack Obama that we're in some post-racial society. And of course, you know, we're not. The Onion magazine got it right when he was inaugurated. It said, "Black man given worst job in world." And what we've seen is a kind of reaction to this. The birther movement, of which Donald Trump is one of the authors of, is another politer way of saying the N-word. It's just more sophisticated and a little bit more clever. He's other, he's different. What's actually other and different about him? It turns out it's the same old thing. It's the color of his skin.
Tell me about the pattern of forgetting. What are in the 25 years, the ears of your audience when they listen? I mean, there's a lot that's happened since the Civil War documentary. I mean, there's Facebook and email and Snapchat, and is there the attention span for these lessons to be heard again, or are we more in the business of forgetting than ever?
You know, it was interesting. 25 years ago, the critics said, "Oh, this is terrific, but no one's going to watch it, Ken. There's MTV and the fast-paced cutting. People have the attention span of a gnat." And essentially, we're saying the same things now. We live in a world in which we are being buried in an avalanche of information that comes from this near constant present moment. And if you live in the present, in a disposable present, nothing else matters. We are desperate, though, for meaning. We're desperate for curation. So when somebody stops and says, "Here's 11 and a half hours about the most important event in American history," you might go, huh. But they watched back then, and they watch now, the Roosevelts or the national parks or our film on World War II or jazz or baseball. And I think it's because all of that information comes to us sort of unregulated, unmediated, and we do want that curation. We do want somebody to say, let me tell you how. So when we talk about binge watching, that's essentially people saying, "I wish to be the author of my own time." I mean, we all know what it's like to be at some website which is aggregating news, and a half an hour later, you have no idea what you just read. Maybe you'll be glib and articulate at the next cocktail party, but you can't even remember what it was. But you don't forget a Civil War. You don't forget a Downton Abbey. You don't forget a House of Cards. You don't forget whatever it is that has your attention span. And in the end, all real meaning accrues in duration. The work that you care about the most, the relationships you care about the most, have benefited from your sustained attention, and that is true for every human being.
You've studied Jefferson, the Roosevelts, Lincoln. You've spent time thinking about presidents and the long scope of history.
Yeah.
Give me your reflections on the presidency now, what we tolerate in left, right, center, whatever, in our leaders now, and whether our lack of patience, whether there's a problem with that or whether it's always been thus.
It's the best question, and really the only question there is about contemporary elections. And I think, let me lead with the good news. The election of 1800 between Thomas Jefferson, arguably the man of the millennium, despite all his flaws, and John Adams, one of the most important and interesting figures in all of American history, was as low and as dirty as you could possibly get. If you were going to vote for Jefferson, that meant your wife and your daughter were subject to rape by those Jacobins. And if you were voting for John Adams, you were voting for the next king of America. That didn't happen. And so we can sit back and exhale a little bit and go, okay, the kind of circus that we see has kind of always gone on. We do have a problem in which we have a media that is bigger than the ideas and the talk itself. If Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, which is only 2 minutes, C-SPAN would cover it, but there'd be a stand-up and saying the president came to Gettysburg to try to distract attention from his disastrous military campaign out west, meaning Tennessee. And that was partly true. That's what he was not trying to distract attention, he was trying to honor the dead, but that would have been the news story, and we might have missed the greatest speech, even though somebody saw it on C-SPAN and say, that was it, yeah, I don't have time to do that, send me a YouTube of it. And that's the problem. We can see in the long scope of history that there's something really elegant, there's something really complicated and subtle about history, about leadership, and that we have a mechanism right now that doesn't always select for that.
Do you think we're too disposable in the way we treat leaders?
Very much so, very much so. And I find the way we throw them out and make instantaneous judgments. The notion that Abraham Lincoln or even George Washington or Thomas Jefferson didn't have a misstep or didn't have a sort of slow second term or didn't do something, now it's, you know, that's it. This presidency is over. It's done. And we tend, I mean, I think the good thing about history, Harry Truman said the only thing that's really new is the history you don't know. And I think in some ways that sort of saying that it gives you, it arms you with a kind of distance that permits you to not make those rash judgments about somebody or some idea. You know, when the meltdown happened, friends would say, oh, we're in a depression. I said, in the depression, in most American cities, the animals in the zoo were shot and the meat distributed to the poor. When that happens, I'll agree we're in a depression. And then all of a sudden, you get to exhale again. And maybe that's history's greatest gift. I mean, Faulkner knew it wasn't then, it's now. It's not was, it's is. And I think that's what this Civil War is talking to us, as if it happened not 150 years ago, but right now, right now.
To see more of our interview with Ken Burns, including a look at what he's working on next, please visit our website at facethenation.com. We'll be right back. Some exciting news on the panda beat out of Washington. The National Zoo's giant panda, Mei Xiang, gave birth to 2 healthy cubs on Saturday, a rarity in captivity. The first cub was born in the late afternoon, and the second was born just after 10 p.m. Zoo officials have not yet determined what sex the cubs are. The cubs may have been born in the United States, but the 14th Amendment does not apply to pandas. The issue is black and white. Since Mei Xiang is on loan to the National Zoo from China, her cubs will return there after spending their first few years stateside. We'll be right back. That's all the time we have today. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.